Well, today finds me on the south slopes of Pine Mountain, Kentucky, in Letcher County, Kentucky. And I am on the banks of what's called the Bad Branch. I don't know where the name came from, but let's see if there's some good things to be found on this hike today. This is actually called the Bad Branch Nature Preserve. Again, this is in Letcher County, Kentucky. We've got a footbridge across the Bad Branch, which drains into the Poor Fork of the Cumberland River, and probably 100 miles west of here tumbles over Cumberland Falls and down into Lake Cumberland and down into Nashville and points beyond. So this is the headwaters of the Cumberland River. And we've got a beautiful mountain stream here in early March. And as typical with March, it doesn't know what season it wants to be this weekend. Cold and snowy last night, supposed to be around 60 tomorrow. Today's going to be a transition day with increasing sun and probably losing this snow cover with highs around 40. So let's enjoy this view of the rhododendrons and hemlocks along the Bad Branch. And we're going to start our hike up Pine Mountain, which is about 1,400 feet higher than the parking area here at Bad Branch State Nature Preserve. I've got the map with me today, and if you look at the P on the bottom of the map here, that is where we are right now, just upstream from that on the blue and white trail. And this trail ascends up to the Pine Mountain Trail, which is the yellow and black trail. Pine Mountain Trail goes for 30 or 40 miles along the crest of Pine Mountain. And I might even have time to do a short piece of that. But this entire loop today would be 5.7 miles if I do the whole thing. I'll be keeping an eye on the time and see what else this hike will allow. I will be staying mostly to the trail, but there might be some ledges or rocks that are of interest off the trail. So welcome to the Bad Branch Nature Preserve, and this is part of the Pine Mountain Trail State Park in Letcher County, Kentucky. And I have come about 3/4 of a mile from the parking lot at the Bad Branch State Nature Preserve, and I'm on the spur trail over to the falls. The main trail ascends Pine Mountain for several miles, and there's a spur trail over to the falls. It doesn't take that long to get to, and is not extremely difficult footing. There's some rocks, but nothing requiring too many mountain goat skills. Here we got some just the reflection of this falling water through these sandstone boulders. When you start to see bigger boulders in a stream, it means it's getting closer to the source of those boulders, which is often a cliff, or in this case a waterfall. These sandstone boulders are very similar to the ones I've recorded in the Cave Run Lake area at Furnace Arch and Leatherwood Loop. It's the same formation that goes across many counties in Kentucky without interruption. So got some house-sized boulders in the valley here and a small tributary of the Bad Branch right here. Let's go around the bend and take a closer look at the falls. And what I have in my sights now are some icicles that have formed on some of these tree branches. You can see there's some falling water from the melting snow above me. What I have done is come up towards the Bad Branch Falls on a little spur trail. And this huge cliff has caught my attention. Probably too big to get in the screen, but we're going to try. We probably have a couple hundred feet of cliff here, going way, way up to the sky. A little hard to see with the lighting here. And I'm underneath where the water drips off. Let's come on around here and take a better look. I think we can get a better look from here. This is the thickness of this rock layer around here. It's a couple hundred feet thick, and it forms the backbone of Pine Mountain. There's several units of sandstone around here that are 200 to 300 feet thick that resist the erosion from the running water and have created cliffs and hogbecks on the summit of this mountain. I'll get to those in a few hours here. But I couldn't help but notice this overhang here, and always looking for neat stuff underneath these overhangs, and sure enough, I found something. Mother Nature doesn't let any real estate go to waste. There's always an animal or a plant that can put it to use. And there probably isn't enough rain that comes underneath this overhang for any plants to grow in this sand. However, there is an animal that can burrow into this dry sand since it does not get wet. It can burrow down and create this little cone. It's about the size of a dime. And these little creatures, I'm not going to dig one up, but there's a little creature down there. I'm not sure if it's an insect or an arachnid that lives in the bottom of that cone and waits for other insects to come on by and fall into the cone, and then it preys upon them. They're called antlions. And the ants are often crawling around in the warmer months, but not today. I'm not sure what the antlions do in the wintertime, if they're tough enough just to stay at this level or if they have to burrow down deeper. But this is the cones that the antlions have made, and there's hundreds of them underneath this rock overhang. So again, none of this is going to waste. It's too dry underneath here for any plants to grow, but the animals have put this real estate to good use. We got some beautiful cross-bedded sandstone here and some horizontal bedded sandstone. You'll be seeing lots of that on this hike. All different colors of tan and brown and gray, and even some quartz pebbles in the mix here. But I'm on the spur trail up to, there's our quartz pebbles right there, about the size of a dime. But I'm on the spur trail. I've come from the parking lot, and come up to where there's a symbol for a binoculars. That's a symbol for a point of interest or scenic point. And I've got an arrow there as to the location of the Bad Branch Falls. And I'm just a few hundred yards below that on the spur trail, which I have marked in black. And that's where I have found this cliff, and I imagine this cliff has created the cap rock for this waterfall. Let's go around the bend and see. Now I have reached the destination of this spur trail, and this is the Bad Branch Falls. It's a good 60 feet high. A little too tall for me to get it all in one frame, but here it is with that massive sandstone cliff just above me here that created that overhang a few minutes ago where the ant lions were living. And this is too moist for them to live underneath this overhang here. We're going to climb down a little closer and get a better look, so we'll pause and resume in just a few minutes. And now I have reached as close as I want to get to the bottom of this falls. You can see it's creating quite the spray, keeping everything moist around here. Got some giant hemlocks growing in this moist ravine. But you don't have to go too far up this mountain to get to some drier site plants, ones that live where the soil dries out for many weeks of the year. I'll be commenting on those as I start my hike up to the top of Pine Mountain. This is just a little spur trail, a massive waterfall, and a massive layer of sandstone. And about not even a 10-minute walk from the main trail. Great place to come on a hot day to cool off. And I imagine this gets large icicles during an extended cold spell. And as I am climbing further up towards Pine Mountain on the Bad Branch Trail, I'm just taking a look at some of the interesting things along the way. We've got a large tulip poplar tree with some grapevines ascending it from different directions. And there's a common plant in many of the hikes I do, and probably the hikes you guys do too. But what caught my attention as I was hiking up here was not the grapevine, but something that could look like a grapevine. I'm going to stop for just a minute and resume in just a second here. And what I have showing through the snow here, probably made it easier to see because there's some snow on the ground this morning. Otherwise, this rusty cable may just look like the leaves on this forest floor. But here's some rusty old cable. And the guidebook says that this entire park, even though it's a nature preserve, it was logged about 80 years ago and went into public ownership about 40 years ago. So these trees are not that big along the trail. Most of these tulip poplar trees are still fairly young. The hemlocks by the waterfall were probably never logged because of the rough terrain there, and not a lot of market value for hemlock. This old cable here is probably from the 1940s logging operation. They would use cables and winches and sometimes even mules, if they couldn't get power equipment up these hollows, to pull the logs out. And yes, these tulip poplar trees get huge and they do have a lot of market value, so that could have been what they were after. I'm also seeing some red oak growing back here as well that would have good market value. And this is the remains of a cable. And I find these cables on a lot of hikes in the southern Appalachians at all elevations, because much of this area was logged in, the late 1800s and early 1900s. So these cables are not uncommon to find along these trails. A lot of these trails follow old railroad grades and old logging road rights of way. We're about another mile past that grapevine and logging cable that I covered a few minutes ago, about an hour ago. And it's a gradual ascent up Pine Mountain here, folks. This is not steep at all. And very scenic. A lot of huge hemlock trees and some rhododendron. What I have reached now is actually a rhododendron tunnel. It grows right over the trail. Boy, this would be neat to see in June and July when this comes into bloom. And there may even be some of the purple rhododendron in the mix here. Most of this looks like the white variety, which is called Rose Bay or Great Rhododendron. But there might be some purple rhododendron in the mix too, which is called Catawba rhododendron. And lots of shade back here, so it would be an easy hike in the summertime, especially with that waterfall to cool off on your way back down. But I believe I'm almost to the junction with the Pine Mountain Trail itself. And there are some natural rock overlooks. About another mile up the trail here. So we'll be looking at those and probably seeing, some more evergreen trees that aren't hemlocks. Here's what we've done so far. We've come up the blue and white trail. Not just the color on the map. The blazes are actually orange. Look like an owl. You go up to the waterfall and ascend, and here's where I found the logging cables. Now I'm using for a pointer here the bud of a Fraser magnolia, and I've filmed that several places along this trail, and I've added that to my other channel the channel is called Barkin' Up the Right Tree, BARKIN apostrophe up the right tree, and that will be on that channel. And one of the 4 magnolias that I'll be adding to that channel as I get chances to find them in these mountains. But my goal would be to get to this junction, then follow the Pine Mountain Trail itself up to what's called High Rock and Mars Rock. And I've spent a lot of time looking around and not walking, so I'm going to have to limit my discoveries for this hike. But hopefully I can get to both those overlooks before I run out of time, before I need to turn around. Here's our rhododendron tunnel near the summit of Pine Mountain. And without this trail, this would be a tough hike. And you'd have to duck and weave your way through these rhododendron thickets. So good work for the trail crew, and thank them for their extra hard labor in making this trail possible. Almost all of it was done by volunteers. And we're getting closer to the overlooks at High Rock and Mars Rock. And those have been videoed by many people, and I will video them as well. I really try to make these segments based on what I'm finding today, because every day is different, and no 2 hikes are the same. So let's do a little zooming in and look at some of the plants that make this part of the country so interesting to hike in the wintertime, when everything else is gray and brown. I've already commented on the rhododendrons and the hemlocks, but let's get down a little closer to the ground here. We've got some shining club moss growing right here with the snow for a backdrop. So it's really handsome in this late winter snow. Only had about a couple inches of snow last night, so this shining club moss is stiff enough and bristly enough that it does not get knocked over by the snow. It's about 3 to 4 inches tall. It's a primitive plant. Like many of the club mosses, there's fossils going back hundreds of millions of years with these club mosses, including some of the plants that became the coal that has been mined in much of this area. I got another little clump of it growing right back here. So really neat to look at. Makes for good little close-up photos. I've also got just a little bit of partridge berry poking through the snow here too. These tiny little leaves are about the size of a, not even the size of a dime. They're about the size of maybe a pea. And they get a little red berry that's about the same size, about the size of a pea, that are not tasty, or I don't believe they're edible, but there is a wintergreen that has a similar color berry that is tasty and edible. So sometimes getting down on your knees and looking around is really where you find the most interesting things for photography and really documenting what makes a hike unique for that particular day. And this is the water that actually tumbles down off this mountain over that waterfall at Bad Branch Falls. So this is really the headwaters right up here, and there's a gap in the mountain where this old wood road goes through, and it used to be the way across the mountain before they built US 119. And this is truly the headwaters of the Cumberland River here. So lots of things to see on this trail, and we're just about up to High Rock, and I'll continue on there. Well, most of this hike was within sight or sound of flowing water as I ascended several different valleys up Pine Mountain. And I was seeing that Fraser magnolia many places, so moist soil and protected from the wind. Well, all of a sudden we're up on this rocky sandstone ridge on the way up to High Rock, and all of a sudden we got a whole different community of plants that are adapted to being facing the sun. This faces south, with very thin soil and exposed to high winds and extremes in temperature. And very few things can grow on thin soil. We've got some mosses here that are starting to develop the soil that these plants can hold on to. We also have some reindeer lichen, which is that lighter colored moss. It's actually a fungus and an algae that grow together, as well as this platy looking material, which is called rock tripe, which looks like little plates. They're brown. And then if there's just enough soil, we can get some low bush blueberry growing from the decayed plant material from the mosses and rock tripe and reindeer lichen. And these pitch pines are hanging on in a very scraggly form, and they may not be that big, but they might be quite old, because when there's not much soil to work with, the plants can grow very slowly. And I've mentioned in my other channel, the Barking Up the Right Tree channel, that pitch pines often grow on the most scenic places we go hiking, because they really only grow where there's thin soil or really sandy soil. And often that is places where there's views. So as we start seeing pitch pines on this hillside, that's an indication that we're going to have some views. And we already do have some partial views through the background here. We got the Black Mountains to my south that are over 4,000 feet high. And this pitch pine often needs a fire for the cones to open up and germinate. And with this exposure here, it wouldn't be uncommon to get a brush fire. And just a few hundred feet uphill from that last stop, again, these pitch pines are a harbinger of thin soil and often scenic overlooks. That's the plant that will grow where nothing else will. And you're hiking up this trail, and you're hiking up this trail, and you see a lot of rock, and you see a lot of rock. And this is what you see as you go up to the top of this knob. And there's been a view to my back to the south this whole last quarter mile, but nothing to the north until you get right here. And then, man, got a 150-foot drop off of a cliff of sandstone, and then an unobstructed view for at least 100 miles. You can see all of the eastern Kentucky coal fields from here. Some of these higher knobs probably have names, but I don't know them. And way to our north is probably the knobs around Berea, Kentucky, that are the first knobs you see as you come south of Lexington. Looking around to our southwest here, this is Pine Mountain. It goes on for many miles. And beyond that is the Cumberland Gap. And then further to the southeast here is what's called the Black Mountains, which has some pretty visible signs of mountaintop removal coal mining. Can't see it too well in the background here, but it's very obvious that large acres, thousands of acres have been removed. The forest has been removed to access the coal resources on these mountains. And the good news is Pine Mountain doesn't have a lot of coal. These rocks are a little older than the coal-bearing measures around here. And they're also tipped. So this is the horizontal here, and the rocks are tipped almost at about a 15-20 degree angle. These are the same sandstones that are level in most of Kentucky, but they're tipped here, and there's a reason for that I'm going to demonstrate. I've got my layers of rock here, represented by these snack cakes. We got the black layer or the brown layer, and then the white layers in between. And what happened is these horizontal rock layers got deformed, and the Pine Mountain actually got shoved on top of the rocks nearby, and it's tipped up at about a 15-20 degree angle here. So you can see how those snack cakes have basically, the snack cake represents the block of mountain that was displaced and put on top of the one next to it. It's called the Pine Mountain Overthrust. And the rock layers are at an angle, and they form hogbacks. You can see where I've nibbled away at that snack cake and left some exposed ridges. And that would be the sandstone, and the white filling would be the shale that's between these layers that erodes away quickly. And this Pine Mountain Overthrust was formed during plate movements back hundreds of millions of years ago when continents were colliding in this part of the world. Since then, the continents have separated apart, and the mountains have eroded away down to basically their roots. So this is our view of high rock, and I haven't even quite got to the top, but this is going to be my lunch spot. We'll do a little more exploring. I got a little more time before I need to turn around. There's another overlook called Mars Rock. I'm going to try to get to that in a few minutes. And the second overlook on today's hike, on the Bad Branch Trail and the Pine Mountain Trail, is called Mars Rock. This is actually a couple of 100 feet lower than the last overlook at High Rock, and it's only about a quarter mile past it. And if you didn't have the time to do both, High Rock has a more expansive view. It goes almost 360 degrees. This one's about 180, but it's a very interesting rock. If you look way in the background, High Rock is sticking up to our southwest between those pitch pine trees. And if you look in the foreground here, this Mars Rock is called that for a reason. It is barren. There's very little vegetation on here. We got a couple scraggly pitch pines holding on. And really, that's about all. Maybe there's a little mountain laurel growing right there. I found a little soil in one of those cracks. But interesting geology. This is all sandstone here. It's got a reddish color, which means it probably has some iron in the mix. And sometimes the layers with more iron will stick around longer than the layers with less iron and create this, looks like a moonscape or a Mars-scape. With all these little bubbles and piles of rock that have resisted erosion more than the ones around them. If you remember the snack cake I used in the last stop, you know, picture these little ridges as the dark chocolate cake, and the filling has washed away and left these little bubbles below it. So the filling would be the softer rocks. It wouldn't have lasted as long. But this is facing the sun. It faces south. It probably gets really hot here in the summertime. And it might burn off on a regular basis, which would allow for very little soil formation if it gets too hot. You do see down in the background there is some lichen, some reindeer lichen, and some rock tripe starting to make some soil here. And this may have had soil at one time, but if it was a severe forest fire, it may have burned back all the plant material, and the soil could have easily washed away. But we sure got our 180 degree view here looking northeast towards the West Virginia coal fields, and then straight north towards Pikeville area, and northwest towards Lexington and Berea. And I don't know if you can see that far because it's hard to tell what's what from this distance. And southwest towards Cumberland Falls area. It's a great view, folks, and a great place to hike. This may be my last video for today. I gotta start making my way back, and it's gonna be an out and back hike today. I could have done this blue loop if I chose to, but I think I'm gonna just retrace my steps because of time limitations. So we started at the P here, came up the blue and white trail, which has really got orange blazes, took a short trip up to the falls, stayed on the blue and white trail, came up to this, no wind today except when I'm trying to hold this map. See if we can get this over here. Okay, so what we have done is going up the blue and white trail, which really has an orange owl shape on the trees. Got on the Pine Mountain Trail, which actually has bright green and orange blazes, and came all the way up to High Rock and then to Mars Rock. And High Rock is higher than the other rocks, hence the name. You could easily make a loop back that would add about a mile to the day and make a 5.7 mile loop. I'm going to probably do the 4.0 one way, excuse me, the 1.9 plus the 0.9, which is 2.8 times 2 would be 5.6. So it's going to be a little shorter, but not much. And that's what we got for today here at Pine Mountain, Kentucky, the Pine Mountain Trail State Park and the Bad Branch Nature Preserve. All in one hike and all worth your time. And this is a day hike. It could be done in 6 to 7 hours, including all the stops.